Já, rektorar, ágæta samkoma. Ég vil þá fyrir hönd Gæðaráðsins bjóða ykkur öll velkomin á þessa ráðstefnu sem fjallar niðurstöðu stofnanaúttektar á Háskóla Íslands og and as you heard or you have shown from our advertisement, for sake of convenience, this conference will be conducted in English. We have here speakers both from the Quality Board and the leadership of University of Iceland, discussing the outcome of a recent institution review of University of Iceland. There was a review visit here in January, and the publication of this review was published by the end of April, and the Quality Board is meeting in Iceland during these days, and we use this opportunity to present the findings of the board and reflect on next steps. I'm not going to have the preface any further. This is a crowded agenda. I'm very pleased that so many of you are able to attend this meeting. And I will first ask Norman Sharp to give us an overview of the outcomes of the review. Please, Norman.
Thank you very much, Magnus, Thorsten. It's a great pleasure to be back in Iceland and back in the University of Iceland. We had an absolutely exhausting week here, if I'm perfectly honest, during the review, but an absolutely fascinating and extremely rewarding time with colleagues here. And I'm sure our exhaustion was nothing in comparison to colleagues in the university, not simply in preparing for the review, but in the ongoing work of the university. What I'd like to do is just talk very, very briefly about process, because I think we now, by this stage, are very familiar with process, and spend a little time talking about what were the big messages that came across to the team. And of course, all of this is in the public domain. The report is published and available both, I think, on the university's website and also on the RANIS website. So if you have any difficulty sleeping tonight, may I recommend a good read through our report. The team that joined us in the review here, you see in front of you, and I was delighted to have a distinguished team, as we've had for all of our reviews in Iceland. Professor Jeremy Bradshaw from Scotland, Bruce Mallory from America, Harold Valderberg from Finland, I do beg your pardon, from Norway, and our Icelandic student from the Agricultural University, Snædis, and I chaired this particular review along with Jean-Marie Homberg. Elizabeth Andersdottir from RANIS, and Frank Quinault from the board acted as secretaries to the board. We visited in January, and just now we're in the middle, as you may well know, of thinking about the future revisions we'd like to make to the quality system in Iceland that we are discussing with you. And one of the first decisions is never have a review at the beginning of January. It is the very worst time. It means that, I mean, almost on Christmas Eve, instead of Magnus and I putting up our stockings for Santa to come, we were furiously emailing to each other about different meetings that might be set up for January. And I eventually got one from Magnus saying, "Do you realise I'm having to contact over 100 staff to meet with you?" But he was very good-tempered about it most of the time. This was the penultimate review of our cycle, the 6th review. During these few days, we had 21 meetings with around about 170 staff, students and alumni, and some of the externals from the University Council. We were given very wide access to a very wide range of documents. There was nothing that we could not get access to, and most of it was provided in the reflective analysis and the associated links, IT links, to all of the documents that were required. It was a very open engagement. What are some of the things that we took out of all of this? One of the big messages, I hesitate to say this with the rector of the university sitting on the platform. I have not shared this presentation with her, which was a mistake, I now realise. And I hope that she recognises what I'm about to say. One of the big messages we took away was that we are in an institution here which is incredibly self-aware. A lot of effort has gone into trying to identify the correct kind of data to have, to collect that data timeously, and to make that data available. I'll have one or two comments on that later. But it is a very self-aware institution. Not a self-congratulatory institution, but self-aware. And there's a very important distinction there. Some examples of where we saw that. The first that we came across was in the reflective analysis. The reflective analysis, by common agreement amongst the whole team, and that's an experienced team who are used to reviewing in different countries, different institutions, were of the view that this was one of the very best reflective analyses they had seen. The reasons for that was that it was very strongly evidence-based. Either the data was given in the reflective analysis, or we had these links to where the data could be found. Importantly, where data was not available, we didn't have to wonder about that. It said, data on this is not yet available. We are now working on that, and there would be a story about how it was being worked on and timescales and so on. It was a reflective analysis that celebrated strengths and talked about weaknesses. It talked about the journey that was being travelled. It was a reflective analysis that I would guess would be an outstandingly useful document if I was in this university in terms of planning the strategic direction of the university. A key part in looking forward. There were, in one of the sections of the reflective analysis, we were told about previous reviews, and there were 20 odds in recent years. A great many different kinds of reviews, which is in itself a great demand and reinforced in the board's mind the importance of trying as far as possible to systematise reviews within a coherent single framework. There was a review of law, and it wasn't just a review of law that lay in bookshelves. It was followed up by quite significant changes in terms of curriculum. The university itself invited the European University Association in to undertake an external review of the whole university as part of its strategic planning some years ago. The university has, as you very well know, merged with the University of Education, and there was a recent review undertaken of that merger, how it had worked, what were the ups and downs of it, and how the university was working to continue to move forward with that. All taken very seriously, all with action plans, all pushing forward. Trying to get student opinions is difficult. The university uses end-of-course evaluations. What did the university say about these? It said, well, some of them work, some of them don't work. It's very difficult to get good student feedback. What are we doing about it? Well, one of the things we're doing is trying to piloting mid-semester evaluations, because one of the issues was poor student returns. One of the reasons for poor student returns was the course was virtually finished, if not completely finished, so why bother filling in the course evaluation? But if you get it in the middle or earlier on in the programme, then you can have an impact, and you'll benefit from that impact. And that pilot, as I understand it, is still on running. But to get into a deeper level, there is a wonderful new structure now being involved in the, taken forward in the university, the Student Experience Survey, surveying students across the second and final year of their undergraduate programmes, and there are plans to extend it to postgraduate as well. And that's a very extensive student experience survey conducted over the whole university, analysed meticulously. The results are shared widely through the university. In preparing this evaluation, they looked across the Atlantic at what happens in the Student Experience Survey in America, NESE, and the Student Experience Survey in the UK, and have borrowed good practice from there, and a lot of it has turned out actually to be very similar to the UK Student Experience Survey. And they're able, therefore, to use the survey in the University of Iceland to benchmark some of their outcomes in relation to UK outcomes, both across the spectrum and in terms of particular institutions. And that in itself shows a terrific and important level of self-awareness. The Student Counselling and Careers Service was repeatedly complimented both by students and other staff, and they are very careful to survey what do their customers think of their services, and tell the customers what they're doing with the results and adapting their provision accordingly. The case study was also a very interesting choice. The case study that was chosen was the graduate school. Why choose the graduate school? You might think, well, let's put the family silverware in the display cabinet so that folk can just see how brilliant we are, show off our riches. Not a bit of it. They took the very brave step of putting the graduate school as a case study of a relatively recent innovation in the university. It is in its early stages of being born, but emerging very quickly. It's not fully fledged, and the university wanted to use this as reflecting for itself on the graduate school. Where was it going in the future? What kind of data did they need to collect to inform themselves about how it was progressing and how was it going to relate to the rest of the university in all sorts of ways. And key amongst all of this, how could it in a most productive way support their increasing numbers of doctoral students in particular. And that was a really useful case study because it allowed us to share with the university a process that was new, a process that they were deliberately trying to enhance. So it was about enhancement in practice. And that's really what all of these processes are supposed to be about. So it was an institution that was very self-aware. It struck the team as being a very open institution. It was very aware of national and international exposure. It didn't wish to hide itself from the world. It wished to open itself to the world and made quite extensive use, both in individual departments and as a community as a whole, in terms of international colleagues. It is developing currently, and as we spoke, we met with colleagues engaged in it, a new international strategy. A very interesting aspect of that strategy that struck the team as particularly valuable was a mentoring scheme for their international students on placement in the University of Iceland, and a buddying scheme with the undergraduates here, a mentoring scheme to support the visiting students, both in terms of their studies within the university, but also in terms of benefiting to the maximum possible from the experience of being in Iceland itself. And where that relationship worked and there was appropriate feedback, the students, the Icelandic students, were being given recognition for that in their diploma supplements. And I think what a great way of celebrating the international presence in the university, capitalising on it for the benefits of all the students here, but also for the visiting students themselves. In the university, and this audience knows better than us about its national role, the role it plays in the network of public universities, the wider relationships with non-university students, the university train, and so on. There are lots of other examples. They have a very extensive structure of, I'm sorry for the abbreviations, it was just to get it all in one page, SLRs being subject level reviews. A very extensive structure of subject level reviews in the university. And this is all new. All of this came in 5-6 years ago. And the university here, I think, if I remember correctly, has been undertaking 27 different subject level reviews, all absolutely meticulously carried out. Not all of them meticulously followed up. It would be wrong to say that that was the case, but the vast majority are, and they're now systematising ways in which they can make sure that they all will be in the future. And it's good to see this work in progress. One of the arguments we had initially in ensuring that subject level reviews remained confidential processes at the institutions was to support open and honest processes of subject level review. And round other institutions also in Iceland we have seen examples of these. But we are particularly struck by some of the examples in the university here of very, very, very serious subject level reviews that really did want to get underneath the skin of what was happening with students and staff in the different subject areas. And there were clear action plans in the best cases with timescales and responsibilities being allocated. And again, very good use of externals, so that just in that process we had 5 externals from Denmark, 5 from America, 2 from the UK, 2 from Sweden, 2 from Norway, 1 from France, and 1 from Finland. And that intelligence is being spread round the community. in the university. I've talked about the emerging international strategy already, and the final thing I would like to stress in terms of an open institution is the team commented several times throughout the whole process about the openness of all of the discussions. We had seriously wonderful discussions with colleagues throughout our 3 days. They were open, they were sharing, they were celebrating, as I said earlier, strengths and wanting to discuss areas in which they were wishing to improve. It was a seriously open engagement. But if I tried to tell you there's not a weed in the garden of the University of Iceland, you would not believe me. And you'd be quite right not to believe me. Of course there are weeds in the garden. I'm only talking about this because my garden is absolutely full of weeds just now. Of course there are. But we're aware of them, we can see them, and therefore we know where to go weeding. I'll drop the analogy. What kind of challenges were the team aware of? One was the whole business of managing the university in a time of severe resource constraint. And we're all very, very conscious of that, the impact of the crisis in 2008, and not starting from a particularly high plateau in terms of university funding. And that takes its toll. People use the expressions during the review about, well, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but the end of the tunnel's now got to be quite close. And that generally was the impression that the team got. People are working at full tilt. And the people that we met are not hiding behind resource constraints or difficult times. The very reverse. They're trying to march on, trying still to develop, trying still to improve. It was impressive. Another of the issues is the need to clarify the role of master's degrees. That is not unique to this university, and it's certainly not unique to Iceland. There have been several major working parties on this in the United Kingdom and wider afield. I'm aware of some work in the Scandinavian countries, for example, in exactly the same area. In some cases, there's a very clear rationale for master's degrees. They've got a very clear location within professional realms, especially. Some of the health areas come to mind, for example. But in other areas, they're sitting a bit uncomfortably between the undergraduate and doctoral programs. And it's not quite clear what the role is, how extensive should the choices be, what is the target. It needs to be a bit of thinking. University is well aware of that and has plans to examine this carefully. The balancing in public universities of open access and meaningful access. Trying to have facilitating access to university that allows students to benefit and proceed productively. And balancing this with the need for open access and entrance tests just does create a different climate within the university. Balancing between the needs of different kinds of students is a real issue because it interferes with getting decent data. When you begin to look at data on student dropout, for example, that will include, unless we're careful, students who've never intended to graduate. For a variety of reasons, they'll come in order to take one or a couple of courses. They don't want more than that. So when they've done their couple of courses, they're then not a dropout. They're a success to be celebrated. And similarly with part-time students. By definition, they will take longer to complete degrees. There are different issues with part and full-time students, very different issues, requiring different kinds of support, different kinds of analysis, and so on. The same is true with distance learning, and that's a kind of theme we've been coming across really throughout Iceland. And that's related to my penultimate point about the strategic policy on IT-based and blended learning. The university is still thinking its way through exactly where it wishes to go in that direction. And while it's good to allow many flowers to flourish, it is nonetheless, I think, the university is thinking through what kind of university strategy does it wish to pursue in this area, and what are the implications of that for development in IT and staff development issues. And that, you'll be pleased to hear, takes me to the end of these issues, but I'd simply like to finish by concluding and saying, of course, that the team did conclude that confidence could be placed in the ability of the university to manage both the student experience and manage the standards of the awards of students. And it was a great pleasure for the team to be working in a university that was so open and positive about both its celebrating its successes and planning its future to address its challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norman, for a very positive and comprehensive review, and also for being within time limits. I just want you to take note that this report is available on the RANI's website. So if you want to check further on what Norman has already said, it's available there. But next I welcome Kristín Ingolsdóttir, Rector of University of Iceland, to the podium. Please welcome Rector Kristín.
Thank you very much, Thorsteinn. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. I would especially like to welcome the Quality Board for Icelandic Higher Education, Norman, Chair, and other members of the board, and to thank them, as well as RANI's, for organizing this conference on the Quality Enhancement Framework for Icelandic Higher Education. Norman, thank you very much for your generous presentation. There are, as you know, two principal reasons for our being here today. First of all, because the Quality Board has issued its report on the institution-wide review of the University of Iceland, and as has been the case in previous institution-wide exercises under the Quality Board, this is followed by an open conference. Secondly, as the first Quality Enhancement Framework, I will refer to this henceforth as QEF, as the first QEF cycle now comes to an end, this is a good time for reflection on what has been achieved and to contemplate new developments before proceeding to the second cycle. I will focus on the institution-wide review of the University of Iceland and how the QEF has been implemented within the university. Pro-Rector for Academic Affairs and Rector-elect Jón Atli Benediktsson will aim his talk on implementation of the recommendations that lie ahead. The publication of the final report of the institution-wide review of the University of Iceland is an important milestone in the first cycle, which started early in 2011 with the publication of the Quality Handbook. According to the handbook, the QEF is mainly based on three elements. First of all, institution-led reviews at subject level conducted by all higher education institutions in Iceland. Secondly, annual meetings of representatives of the Quality Board with university representatives. And third, the Quality Board-led reviews at the institutional level following the institution's own extensive self-analysis. Immediately following the publication of the handbook, the university started organizing its implementation of the QEF. The focus of the procedure was to use the QEF as a general framework, but to accommodate for diversity. We aim to follow the objective in encouraging assessment of quality assurance in a structured manner and to detect opportunities for quality enhancement and quality awareness. And it has indeed been an educational journey for the university. In the past 5 years, with the last faculties finishing this summer, all 25, as Norman mentioned, all 25 faculties, as well as 2 interdisciplinary programs, have undergone an extensive internal review with active participation of staff, students, and foreign experts. And Norman mentioned the openness and honesty that characterize the subject level reviews, and I would like to salute my colleagues for their integrity and openness during the process. It has made a huge difference to the benefit of the evaluation. At the same time, the first faculties have commenced working with structured follow-up procedures based on their action plans, which is meant to utilize the internal review for a more policy-oriented performance management in these areas. Now, based, amongst other things, on the subject-level reviews, an extensive self-review at the institutional level was carried out and concluded by a detailed debate of the University General Forum and the University Council. And before delivering the final version of this report, the reflective analysis that is, in November 2014, all recommendations received by relevant parties were taken into consideration. And in January, the group of international experts, chaired by Norman and Jean-Marie Ambert, arrived for the site visit and held more than 20 meetings with over 170 representatives from administration, staff, students, and industry. The results of the work were then processed, leading to the publication of the institution-wide review of the University of Iceland on April 30th. The review group concluded that confidence can be placed in the soundness of the University of Iceland's present and likely future arrangements to secure the academic standards of its awards, and that confidence can also be placed in the soundness of the present and likely future arrangements to secure the quality of the student learning experience. Undeniably, we are extremely pleased and proud of the overall result to receive the highest possible score within the first cycle of the QEF. The report contains a number of recommendations for the university's quality assurance system, both pointing out areas of high performance and areas where there is a need for improvement. We do not have the opportunity today to discuss all these recommendations in detail, but I would nevertheless like to point out that they were largely in line with the results of the university's reflective analysis, containing a total of 75 measures, many of which are already being implemented. We certainly take seriously the more critical recommendations contained in the report. And Norman, thank you for presenting these in such a gracious way. We do take them seriously. And we also take seriously the warnings in the report of potential dangers due to underfinancing of the university. Throughout the difficult economic challenges that the country has faced in the last years, we have taken the role of the university very seriously, and we have been convinced that the role is best played through sustained focus on excellence in research and teaching, and so as to be able to contribute in the best possible way to our society. But I will say that this is proving to be increasingly difficult. At the crossroads from the first cycle to the second, some ideas for change have been presented to us, and we have discussed them at our Icelandic Rectors Conference meetings, and we will be discussing this tomorrow, at a meeting tomorrow. And we welcome Andrei Susek to our meeting tomorrow. I think that we all feel that the first round has been extremely beneficial, and that the suggestions of taking evaluations of PhD programs and research on board in the second cycle sound logical and relevant. If I may venture a further input, this is my last chance, it would be to contemplate strategic recommendations, taking into consideration all the changes and all the challenges that universities are facing. Internationalization, funding, interdisciplinarity, necessary reform in curricula stemming from new needs and new opportunities due to technological developments, these sorts of things. And if we take interdisciplinarity as an example, we consider that the breadth represented by our five schools to give strength and fascinating opportunities, really, for interdisciplinary collaboration in research and teaching. And we are prioritizing the exploitation of these opportunities. We have the two formal study programs that involve collaboration between all five schools that were evaluated this time round: public health on one hand, and environment and natural resource management on the other hand. In addition, we have recently created informal interdisciplinary platforms in areas such as fisheries, Arctic studies, molecular biology, tourism, remote sensing, medieval studies, renewable energy, development studies, and other areas. And I could see great benefit of having input from international experts with their fresh eyes on our university in helping us with comments on the existing platforms and to map out further possibilities. The university, as Norman mentioned, has previously undergone external evaluations and has been dedicated to utilizing recommendations in a structured way to strengthen performance. And thank you, Norman, for mentioning the evaluation of the merger between University of Iceland and the University of Education, which the university initiated last year itself, and we are now following up on that. We took the merger very seriously and the expectations, and so we are very pleased to have had a panel of international experts do this evaluation, and we now have an action plan for implementation of reforms. When I became rector 10 years ago, the university had just undergone 3 evaluations, 2 at the initiative of the government and 1 at the initiative of the university itself. And this was the EUA evaluation chaired by Toby Bull, who's very pleased to see her today. The recommendations proved invaluable in the coming years and in our strategic policy making. And I am sure that the current recommendations will be used in a constructive way to help the university on its path. I'd like to conclude by thanking the Quality Board for Icelandic Higher Education for their invaluable work dedicated to higher education in Iceland. There's no doubt that the results of this external quality assurance review will help to strengthen the performance of the university in the years to come. It's a pleasure and it's a relief to take leave of office after 10 years with the messages in the report. They are, however, the messages and the result is exclusively a tribute to the dedicated staff and students of the university. And when I say staff, I mean academics as well as leading administrators in the central administration as well as in the 5 schools. I'd like to conclude by expressing my sincere thanks to all those who participated for their invaluable contribution. I'd also like to thank, we don't have any students in the room, sorry, yes we do. Good. So, I see the chairman of the Student Council here, and others. I'd like to thank our students for their invaluable contribution, which has been so precious during the whole process. And being able to rely on your work and sensing the initiative and sincere interest of students in improving the university's performance has been priceless. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for your kind words, and thank also for a very good and successful cooperation regarding this review. Now I will say a few words about the feedback we have got on the work of the Quality Board, talk about how we have been reviewing the quality enhancement framework, and this has of course been an evidence-based analysis, and try to work on it for improving the next circle. Before I begin, I would like to tell that before the coffee break, we will open the floor for discussion or questions and answers. So you can prepare for that, to think about that. So just to, in the background, back in 2011, when the quality enhancement framework was developed, it was always assumed that it would be evaluated at the end of the first cycle of operation in 2015. And this would be done by seeking the experience of those parties that have been involved in this process. The method we developed, we hired a third-party company to secure the impartiality of it, and they sent a semi-structured questionnaire to all Icelandic higher education institutions, the Quality Council, the National Student Union, individual student unions, all external experts that have taken part in institutional-wide reviews, and all external experts that have taken part in subject-level reviews. And you see the number in the brackets. The first number indicates the number of institutions, and the second number indicates how many sent in the responses. And as you will see, there is overall a very good response rate, and especially since this was a fairly extensive questionnaire. So we are very grateful for all of those who responded to this method. I will then talk about sort of the main conclusions. We first asked about the principles of the quality enhancement framework, and in general the respondents were positive towards the main principle, and especially the student emphasis. The higher education institutions in particular, they found the principles clearly laid out, and subject level review experts described them as positive and progressive. And all respondents believe that these principles should remain within the second cycle of the QF. But there were many suggestions for additional emphasis, such as more transparency, social responsibilities of higher education institution, research, the relational nature of research, learning and teaching, the view of employees as future stakeholders, and more. Next, we asked about the implementation of the QAF and the quality board, and this was also viewed as positive towards enhancing quality standards at the Icelandic higher education institutions. The current structure was remarked as being appropriate and professional. In renewing membership, there was stressed the importance of keeping balance between maintaining the current knowledge and introducing new members. There were several respondents who believed that the student voice could be increased, having a student member on the quality board. There were suggestions for increased communication between the quality boards and other parties within the higher education system, and more secure funding. And the annual meetings were for most part seen as being useful. Next, we asked about the Quality Council, which was generally regarded as important venue for exchanging information and sharing experiences. But there were mentioned some obstacles in the Quality Council, such as lack of funding and excessive workload of members. And these were many that can agree with that. Then turning to the institution-wide reviews, and at this time we had conducted institution-wide reviews of all institutions. This was sent out in February. So we had completed all institution-wide reviews except of University of Iceland and Bifröst. But the site visit of University of Iceland had occurred. But the higher education institutions, they were agreed on the usefulness, and the external experts were generally pleased with the review. The reflective analysis produced by the higher education institution helpful, site visits well organized, and discussions open, transparent, and insightful. both the higher education institution and the experts commented on the excessive meetings and narrow time, and we who have participated in these kind of events would certainly agree. And the grading scale of the institutional review was stated as needed further clarification in terms of implications of limited confidence, distinction between confidence and full confidence, and so on. And when it comes to marking of research, this might become an issue. The subject level reviews overall experience was positive, but there is a call for need for clearer guidance, and this came from all groups. And there were also other issues such as more need for feedback, need for training of students, having perhaps more than one external expert on the subject review teams, adding another student representative on the subject level review committees, and the need for standardized data. There was a conflicting message on issue that we have long been grappling with, the public disclosure of subject level reports, which was mixed. People who were skeptical of making the reports publicly available were mostly worried that in doing so could jeopardize the candor which characterized the reports. And but there were also those who favored disclosing the reports. It's important to have the framework transparent, important for the institutions to learn from each other, and students saw these reports as a tool to monitor and maintain quality. But there is perhaps a middle ground here to sort of summarize the reports, and that was suggested. We also had questions about incorporating research, which was largely welcomed by most, but to varying degrees. Some saw this as an essential component of a university operation and should therefore be reasonable and necessary. And but there were many who had considerations that need to be kept in mind, and such as differences between fields when evaluating research, the need for research information system, not only bibliometric methods should be used, and this would only partially complete the picture of university. When drawing this together, of course, the Quality Board is seriously reviewing the report, the clever data report, and as other material, it's on the website of the RANIS, and you can see it from there. But we have also hired an international expert, Andre Susok from European University Association, and she will do an independent evaluation of this process. I'm very pleased she's with her today, and she will do a review of this system. But to tie this together, how we sort of get from what we found out in this kind of exercise, there are definitely things that need to be in the next phase, and that's one of the things that is being discussed, is to add a member of the quality board who represent student interests, and there we need to be careful about criteria and selection of that kind of representative. We would see the need to strengthen the Quality Council with secure funding and also with a strategic plan. The Quality Council is of extreme importance for the work of the Quality Board and needs strengthening. We need more guidelines related to the subject level reviews, number of students involved, role of externals, and the focus. For the institutional reviews, we need the common data set that has been, well, somewhere in the making for many years, but we have not seen it yet. Links with accreditation need to be strengthened or clarified, and how do we do with the follow-up of the review and things like that. And about judgments, we need a more detailed description of the implications of different judgments and categories, and finally how to incorporate research. And all these matters are now being discussed with the Quality Board, and we also need your feedback to sort of guide us in this. And I'm sure that Norman Sharp will talk a little bit more in his later presentation. So I would conclude this presentation, and of course we can discuss this further before the tea break. But I give now the floor to Sigurður Sigurðsson, who is a new senior advisor to the Quality Board, and he will talk about the initial outcomes from analysis of all institution-wide reviews to date. So please welcome Sigurður.
Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you. So when I was talking to Thorsteinn about my contribution here to this conference, the idea was that I would kind of take an outsider's perspective on what the institution-wide reviews tell about the process. And I figured that was kind of a surefire way of getting me fired after 5 weeks on the job to tell this big group of people how to do their job. So I'm going to put my neck on the line here, so to speak. So the way that I've approached it is that one of the first things that I figured, the way to immerse myself in the Quality Board activities and kind of get to know this job was to read all the institution-wide reviews. And after a while I saw that there were some common themes. And after that I kind of stopped, wrote down some of those themes and started again to read the institution-wide reviews with an eye to see if there were common themes and to what extent they appeared there. And that's kind of what my talk is about here. A little bit about me. I graduated from here twice, English literature, or English as it's called, and then psychology, and then I went on and got my MA in industrial organizational psychology from Western Michigan University, and then 06 from the same university in behavioral analysis with an emphasis on organizational application. So my expertise is IO psychology, vinnusálfræði, if you will. I've also been a member of academia. I was an assistant professor for 7 years at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and then in Florida Institute of Technology for the last 2 years. And if you notice the last entry there and then look out the window, you wonder, why am I here? Well, the reason is that I've always looked at my career kind of as an opportunity to find smarter people than me to learn from. It hasn't been, well, it's been surprisingly easy, but I think I've outdone myself this time, because working with Thorstein, working with Norman, and then meeting the quality board today and working with Hallgrímur, of course, and the wonderful people at Rannís has shown me that I've outdone myself here. There's some serious brain power that I'm learning from. Also, I have some background in organizational consulting, and I've done accreditation visits to universities for program accreditation, and also for accreditation of safety processes in industry, the United States and Europe. So I have some background both in education and then in business. So I decided to try to kind of combine my interests and look at this. So I look at the institution-wide reviews, talk about some common quality challenges across the higher education institutions in Iceland as they are reflected in the institution-wide reviews, talk about some best practices that seem to be found in the institution-wide reviews, and then kind of an outsider's perspective on the process, and see if I could add something to the clever data report on how this can be improved. So here's a list of the institution-wide reviews that have been done to date. Reykjavik University volunteered to be the first, of course, in 2012. Since then, a lot of things have happened, of course, but that's the what I had access to. Agricultural University of Iceland, 13, as well as Hólar, Háskóla Akureyri, 2014, University of Akureyri, Icelandic Academy of the Arts, and University of Iceland, and Bifröst then, but it's not completed. So the last one here, Bifröst, was not included in my review. So I decided, so I told you, I started reading the institutional-wide reviews, and then stopped and wrote down some of the things that I noticed were common across some of these and read them back. And what I found that there were some things that were consistently creeping up were clear policies and follow-up procedures in academic life. So regarding, for example, starting new programs, continuous monitoring of student outcomes and things like that. Then there was role and process clarity for quality efforts. Who was responsible for what aspects of quality at the institutions? There was often quite a bit of role confusion reported in the institution-wide reviews about what bodies and what individuals really were responsible for what outcomes in terms of quality. Goal setting and prioritization. This meant, for example, if we have 5 things we want to do really well, or 75 things we want to really do well, we have to have some prioritization. If the institution-wide review mentioned that, then I noted that. And then the final thing was learning outcomes. This is an ongoing, benchmarking. Did the institution-wide review make note that the university was not seeking external benchmarks or seeking any benchmark information for that part? And then in terms of learning outcomes, like I said, that's been an important issue on the radar of Icelandic universities, defining both learning outcomes for degrees and for individual courses, and then figuring out kind of how to marry these. And then if there were problems reported in institution-wide reviews of that, I counted that. And being a psychologist and interested in data, I did a little bit of bean counting. So what we have here on the y-axis is basically the average occurrence per institution-wide review of these challenges. So the clear winner here is clear policies and procedures in academic life. So if you are an outsider just reading these institution-wide reports and you were thinking in terms of quality, what seems to be the biggest challenge across higher education institutions in Iceland, it would be in terms of clear policies and procedures in academic life. Remember, I don't know if this to be the truth. I'm only reflecting what is in the reviews. Role and process clarity for quality efforts, that these processes are documented, that there are deadlines for activities within these processes, that there's clear accountability for actions within these processes. These were commonly cited concerns. Goal setting and prioritization on the benchmarking and learning outcomes about once every report. Now, Thorsteinn, when you saw these data, he said, well, go and look again for benchmarking because I don't believe your data. So I did a word search and double-checked my data. And it was true because only some reports made reference to it. There were one report or two that had 2 citations of benchmarking being a challenge, but other reviews simply had them as that they were just fine in terms of benchmarking. The institution was doing pretty well. But I, for example, would have liked to see more about what exactly were those benchmarks and what exact things were being benchmarked. It's not enough to identify a benchmarking institution. It is also to figure out what exact benchmarks do you want to adopt from them. If they want to have a specific type of outcome, do you also adopt that? And I found that to be in institution-wide reviews to be missing. There was not a lot of meat on the bones, as we say in Icelandic. Again, I'm sure to get fired as I say this. And then goal setting and prioritization of learning outcomes, again, once per institution-wide review, with some variability. This is not, like I said, not to say that these issues were not talked about in the reports. They were not cited as problems. But I did notice that there was considerable variability across institution-wide reports of kind of the difficulty level of questions that have been aimed at the institutions. It seemed sometimes that that the teams had gone easy on the institution on some of these issues. Like there were some instances of that for me as an outsider looking at this. That there was not quite always the same questions, and the institution were not always asked to prove at the same kind of have a higher what standard they could demonstrate that they were following certain quality efforts, if that makes sense. Now, it wasn't all about bad things that I noticed. Here are some good best practices. University of Akureyri assessment of learning outcomes. Reykjavík University, its external benchmarking. HOLAR links with external stakeholders and collaborators. University of Iceland, Center for Teaching and Learning. I've been already on 2 workshops with them since I started my job, and I've been very impressed with the work they do. Hvanneyri links with industry stakeholders. And the Art Academy preparation of the reflective analysis and the annexes. This is all great, but I didn't see a single reference to a higher education institution in Iceland, for example, going to the University of Iceland and say, tell me about your Center for Teaching and Learning, how can we learn from that? I didn't see anybody go say, we went to Akureyri and asked them how we figured out how they come up with learning outcomes. And as far as I know, nobody's talked to Reykjavík University about their external benchmarking. If they're doing it, it's not finding its way into the reports. So either we need to be better at doing it or better at reporting it, or both. And then finally, what I see as some opportunities to make this whole quality of enhancement framework a little bit better is mostly in terms of formalizing it. And I realized that we have, for this process, to come up with a common metric for 7 extremely different institutions. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at things that should be in place regardless of size or regardless of function of the institution. And some of the things that I thought of were these things, that we should be challenging the institutions to come up with answers to specific key questions. For example, clear policies and procedures, role and process clarity, goal setting, prioritization, benchmarking and learning outcomes, to have consistent questions and ask for specific kinds of data in response to these questions. I also noticed kind of, like I said, I come from an industrial organizational background, and I'm thinking about this as an IO psychologist, is that we should also challenge the institutes to come up with a link between their quality initiatives and the mission of the institution. Kind of take a step back. Why do we exist? And then make quality initiatives follow that mission rather than vice versa. Prioritization of efforts. If you have 75 things on your list to do well, you need to focus on a few things first to do well. And then identification of resources for efforts. I saw a lot of exhortations to do our best in the institution-wide reviews. We're going to do our best to make sure this is good. We're going to make sure we do our best that this is good. But how are you going to get money for it? Where are we going to get the resources? Where can we network to get resources for that? That was often missing. And that's related also to accountabilities for specific steps and action plans. Let's say you want to evaluate learning outcomes. Coming up with dates, coming up with teams, coming up with action items. What is going to happen, let's say on a 2-year goal, when you have a 2-year goal of improving learning outcomes? Who would be responsible for each of these? Creating action items and following up on them. That seemed to be variable across the institutions. And then, like I said, deadlines and timelines for specific steps in these action plans. In the reflective analyses and in the reviews themselves, a lot of unspecific exhortations to do our best to make things happen. That's kind of my outsider's perspective on this. And then the recommendations for the reviews themselves, I think that we want to, they always end with a series of recommendations. And I was a little confused when I read them first because I wasn't sure what order they were in. And I'm not sure they are in an order. So maybe arranging them by themes or assigning priorities, saying these 3 are your key things to focus on in this cycle, or these 4. And perhaps we might not want to go there, but link them to future confidence ratings. If you get confidence now, you get full confidence if this in good shape. If you get limited confidence one time around, how to get confidence is to go and fix these 4 things. It could be on the order of themes, it could be on the order of priorities. And the benefits of doing these things is that we will probably find more consistency in the content of the reflective analyses and more consistency in the content of the reviews, because reading these 2 sets of documents, the reflective analyses and the reviews themselves, there were often some discrepancies in terms of where information was presented. For example, benchmarking information I found in, I think, 4 different sections of our report. Sometimes 2.4, sometimes 3.6, sometimes 3.7, and I think that some formalization of this process is needed. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing the people that have come before me. I would be crazy to do so. I don't understand that history that went into this. Again, I'm just presenting here an outsider's perspective of what I see, some of the kind of the items that give you a bigger bang for your buck, to borrow an expression from American English. Thank you.
Thank you, Siggi, and you prove very well the value of having a fresh eyes to look at the process. That's always we should think of when we are evaluating what we have been doing. Finally, I give the floor again to Norman Sharp, and he will respond then to what we have said here, and sort of give us some guidance how we are looking at the next quality cycle. After his presentation, I hope we have some time for a few questions and answers. So please, Norman.
By this stage, early afternoon, post-lunch, being talked at for this length of time, everyone's beginning to look a wee bit sleepy. So I think either I just speak very softly, or we make this an interactive session. And I think the latter. I think if we I've only got 250 slides to go through, so I'll go through these very quickly. But then I really do think we should just turn this into a discussion, which would be nice and be fun. The process we're going through, Thorsten outlined briefly. Feedback's been collected for the last 5 years, indeed longer. We have sat round endless tables and met in small groups, big groups, and so on, getting feedback on what we're thinking of doing, what we have done, and what we're planning on doing further. The survey Thorsten outlined has already been now, the outcomes have been published. We're delighted, and I'm glad Thorsten mentioned it, we're delighted to have welcomed Andre Sursok to our midst today and on an ongoing basis until the end of the calendar year. And Andre is probably one of the best known figures in European circles and indeed further in the world of managing quality in higher education. There are basically two schools of thought on quality assurance, and you've got to be very careful to talk to the right school. In my very biased perspective, there is a school of thought that thinks these things should be about inspections, and you hire people that know the right answers to go and tell people that they've got the wrong answers, and that's not really where we want to be. There is another school of thought that sees quality and the management of quality in universities today as extremely challenging issues that have to be seriously engaged with. And it's all about constantly trying to move forward in this difficult world that we inhabit. And Andre is one of the very serious thinkers in that school of thought. So we're very pleased to have her with us on your behalf, so that she, hopefully at the end of the day, can give you assurance that this has been an evaluation that has been carried out seriously and on the basis of listening properly to feedback. But also, we will have gained along the road by Andre's insights, and at our meeting this morning, we have already gained enormously from that. And she'll be joining colleagues in some of the annual visits tomorrow. She'll be meeting with the student bodies, she's meeting with the Rectors' Conference, and she's meeting with the rectors. So she's got a very busy couple of days in front of her. So we're delighted to have Andre with us. Our door is open throughout all of this. We arrange key discussions with the key interest groups almost every time we're in Iceland, and all of that will lead to a dissemination conference on the 10th of November in Iceland. And at that stage, we will hope that we have more or less got the I's dotted and the T's crossed for QEF 2. And then everyone climbs aboard and we set sail on the 1st of September 2016 with QEF 2. Quite what order things will start with, we're still in discussion with the Ministry about. There's a bit of debate about when the different bits of it will kick in, but as soon as that can become clarified, we will share that information with you. Right, that's the end of the monologue. Thorsten identified some of the issues that we're tussling with. We don't have cut and dried answers at the moment to quite a lot of this. We've got thoughts that we think we will present to you as the way forward, but we're not quite there yet. So I cannot give you answers just now, but I can tell you what's in our heads, but more importantly ask you to tell us. We had a bit of a discussion about the principles this morning that are in the handbook. And most of the feedback was the principles were broadly right and to hang on to them. There was a discussion about adding transparency as a principle or a value, and there was also discussion about linking our principles and values more firmly to the new edition of the European Standards and Guidelines. Now, the thoughts underpinning that are that at some point, while we have always had an eye on the guidelines, the European Standards and Guidelines, there is just a new set out, and it's important that we pay attention to that. But secondly, it's in our heads that we would like the system in Iceland to be in a position to be recognised within the European Standards and Guidelines, within ENQA, European Network of Quality Assurance Agencies, at some point during the second cycle. And therefore we wish to put in place processes that would sit very comfortably within ENQA. Doing that not simply because we want to join a club, but doing that because we think it's important that we can demonstrate that what we're doing in Iceland is far better than anything else in the world, but at least meets their criteria also. So that's where we're going on principles. At least that's where we're thinking of going in principles. So add transparency, have more of a discussion around principles and values, and link them more explicitly to ENQA guidelines. Also benefiting from, in particular, Barbara's experience in the States, making sure that we're picking up good principles from there. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on principles. If there's a loud snoring noise from your neighbour, could you give them a dunt? And it's not the best place to start, perhaps. Good. So I take silence as meaning that's a great idea. Yes, just go ahead. The Quality Board. The Quality Board folks said, by and large, you've got the right kind of makeup to the board. You don't necessarily get everything right all the time, but you get most things right most of the time. You try hard, could do better, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, saying the Quality Board is fit for purpose. With a major exception in terms of, although we talk the talk about the importance of student involvement, we actually don't have a student involved in our board itself. And our provisional conclusion this morning is that we should indeed invite a student to be a full member of the board. There was a bit of a discussion, should it be one student or two? As always, we compromised, and we have provisionally come to a conclusion to have one student, but also a reserve student. And that reserve student would be entitled to attend board meetings, but would not be a formal member of the board. It's trying to get a balance between not getting a huge board, but also not having a student isolated. And that's always a difficult thing. So that's where we are. A 2-year term of office for a student being defined as someone who is either currently a registered undergraduate or postgraduate with an Icelandic institution, and we would ask for the cooperation of the National Union, LIS, in the selection of the student, and we would work in collaboration with the Quality Council in making that appointment. I don't know if there are any views on, especially from our students, about that. Good idea?
Pretty good idea.
Yes, yes. I think one of the important points is we would want that student to be engaged with the sector as far as possible, to really get under the feeling of the student experience, But an important point is always that this is a role for someone representing the perspective of students. It's not a representational role, as it were, and that's quite an important distinction. But that's good, just to get that very off the cuff informal feedback, and that is something that we will formally now sort of try and push forward with. In terms of the membership of the board, we've talked before about some of us needing to be recycled in more ways than one, and we need to do that. You need to be exposed to different people with different ideas, but you also, it's the old business, social science business of continuity and change. We need to keep continuity going, stability going, but also change going with it. So our thoughts from this morning are that in this of course is partly, in fact largely, these are only proposals we can make to the ministry. We are appointed by the ministry. Our thoughts are that two of us, in 2016-17, perhaps one would retire, one member of the board would retire, and we would bring on one additional member of the board and also the student member. The additional member of the board, assuming that we move forward, which currently looks likely, with evaluating research, we would make an additional appointment to the board with a particular expertise in the evaluation of managing research. And we would propose that that individual would join us from next academic year to help us in taking all of that forward. Other than that, every 2 years, two of the current members of the board would retire and be replaced by another two, so that by the end of the cycle, you will have some fresh-faced and hopefully fresh-brained people on the quality board. And that way, we hope we can bring you, as I say, some continuity and change to the whole process. Any thoughts on that? We did, sorry, just while you're thinking, we did discuss, as we have discussed frequently, the business of rooting the whole process firmly in Iceland, and I hope we've tried very, very, very hard to do this. We haven't, I mean, we come with ideas, of course we do, but we come trying to shape a system that's made in Iceland for Iceland. And that's been a very serious endeavour, and that has been rooted very firmly in our secretariat, for example, and increasingly through the appointment of Ollie. Well, we're going to sack Ollie after his presentation, but once we replace Ollie, that will be a firm route in Iceland for the work of the board and the Quality Council. I'll talk about that a wee bit more shortly. We did discuss whether we should have Icelandic academics on the board. It's an important discussion we should have had. It was important to have it, and we had it at the outset as well. The advice that we have consistently been given from within Iceland, indeed from yourselves, is it is best if the board itself is kept international. And that is balanced by the Quality Council, which is entirely senior staff from the universities and higher education institutions within Iceland. So it's not that we haven't considered that, and it is certainly not that we're not aware of the very good ideas and incredible abilities of colleagues that we keep coming across. It is simply the reality of the situation and the advice that we're given. And I see some nods around the room that I think is in broad agreement with that. But please feel free to disagree. This is going better than I thought. The Quality Council the Quality Council, we got it right and wrong at the beginning. In establishing this system, it was really important, I think, that we were able to work with the most senior staff in the system. And the Quality Council was largely comprised of directors, and Christine and colleagues in the room played a very, very active part in shaping the whole of the QEF. That was a very, very valuable process. And I think what came out of that was a really interesting structure. But in ongoing work, that was the wrong constitution. And we changed in something like year 2 or 3, we changed the constitution. And we now have, as you know, in the Quality Council, the senior staff largely responsible for managing quality and standards in all of the institutions, and 2 student members. It elects its own chair, and the chair is the distinguished Magnus Balderson, who is doing a tremendous job. So our view is that the constitution of that is now correct. Our view, shared by and indeed told to us by the Council itself, is it has great potential, but is unable to deliver its potential because it does not have the resources. It has people on it who are literally run off their feet in their day jobs, as it were. In their own universities, they are more than kept fully employed. And to try and carve out additional time for the Quality Council, and not just to attend meetings, but more importantly, to do the work behind the meetings and move things forward, has been nigh on impossible over the last couple of years. And that is certainly not in spite of effort. It has been, the supreme efforts have been going into this. And the Quality Council has done a lot of very good work already. I mean, Ollie, in his, all joking apart, excellent presentation, Ollie. Ollie highlighted the business of sharing from one review to another. That does happen in the Quality Council. The Quality Council are discussing regularly what's happening in the different institutions. And I'm told by Magnus and Sigrun and other colleagues in the Quality Council that it is providing, at the moment, a very useful role, simply in terms of a neutral forum where these things can be shared, warts and all. It's not a question about holding the end up of your institution. It's about sharing problems and discussing how these problems can be solved. And that's a very, very key role for the Quality Council. But we need to help it forward. In QEF2, we need to get more resource for the Secretariat to support it, more resource to support project work, and a budget for the Council itself. We talked before about the importance of building collectively on expertise. If the expertise is in Iceland, that's wonderful. We can share that expertise round the system, run workshops round the different institutions so that all staff can share in these things. If that expertise happens to be abroad, for peanuts in terms of the higher education budget in Iceland, we can bring experts to Iceland to spend a week and share whatever expertise they have, just to discuss their approaches to things with yourselves. It is such an economical way of sharing things and moving forward. So we don't need a huge budget, but we do need a budget. We need to allow colleagues from the Quality Council themselves to travel, to engage in conferences, to bring things back. Now, I know a lot of that is happening just now, but as Ollie said earlier, we can systematise this a lot more. We can all share in these things much more. So that's our thought about the Quality Council. It's in good shape. It's fit for purpose, it's ready to go, but it needs a new engine. It needs some resource. It needs some resource behind it. Any comments on the Quality Council? I don't know, Magnus, if you would like to add anything? Or Sigrun? No? Splendid. Annual meetings. Annual meetings, again, were warmly welcomed, but you said to us you could do a bit better. Just now, they've tended to be a wee bit one-sided. We need to use them more interactively, and although you said to us, at least that's what we're picking up from the feedback, the informality is valued. We don't want to lose that, but a wee bit more formality would actually be helpful. For example, what about if we shared, that is the institutions, say a month before the annual meeting, drafted an agenda and sent it, and said, what do you think of this? And whoever you're working with on the board could say, yes, let's add such and such and such and such. And as a standing item, we could have the most recent subject level review reports that you have produced for discussion and sharing. And I think that would be a helpful way forward. So keep the annual meetings, don't lose them, but let's try and just manage them to get more, in Ollie's phrase, bang for our bucks out of them. Let's get more mileage out of them. And I think that is good. I think that is good. I would go along with all of that. Any other ways that occur to you that we could improve these things?
Norman?
Please.
Can I ask you a question? Thank you very much, but I'm not that worried about it, but I think there's one issue that hasn't been named, and that is flow of information between the parties, such as body board or the council, and there's a one stakeholder who hasn't been mentioned many times today, and that's the ministry, which is extremely important. And I'm just thinking about how is the flow of information between these parties, like the body board and the public council and the ministry itself. Do you meet annually? Do you talk to each other? Because in the end, the ministry is the stakeholder here, which decide how much money we get, which what we do really is, do they think about it? Can you say something about that?
Indeed. It was number one in my general list, the ministry. We do talk regularly to ministry. More or less every time we're here, and more if required. We meet with the officials from the ministry, and literally on maybe a couple of occasions meeting with the minister himself, herself initially and himself latterly. So we do communicate. Thorstein keeps a hot phone line, as it were. We have a no surprises arrangement with the ministry. And a day-to-day working level, we do, I think, work quite well, but to a point. And that point is, obviously, it's a slightly sensitive area, but that point is, I think, at times it's difficult. I think there is so much going on, and it's difficult for the ministry to know where the minister is wanting to go. And they are trying to juggle so many balls that there are a number of things that we've been discussing for 5 years now. A common data set. There was another one right at the front of my mind. Accreditation. Links between the QEF and accreditation are two that we've been talking. Just in March, I had a meeting with the ministry talking about that. And round the table we agree, but things get in the way of actually of something to happen. And that's where undoubtedly I am at a bit of a disadvantage in not being an Icelander. But my big brother here, we send in to deal with the ministry. And Thorstein does what he can to keep these things moving. But it is limited, and I know Christine and rectors also raise the same things consistently. I don't want to put you in the spot, Christine, but if you felt you'd like to say anything on this, do feel free.
Well, thank you. The Minister of Education, Science and Education and Culture does meet with us rectors, not so often these days, but discussed at these meetings, mainly to do with the issues that we spoke about before here today, on how we appreciate the system.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, I think Krishna's question is very important, because that is, the connection between you as the policy board and the ministry is, of course, very important. And having mediation on values must be very important as well. So I don't think I have much to add, really.
Yeah. Thank you, Christine. I think we're trying to tackle this question from all sides, as it were, and both Rannis and the rectors, and indeed, hopefully, the student union. In Scotland, it is the student union that the ministers listen to, probably more at some points than anyone else. It is an important lever. However, the point you make is a very good point, and we are minded at the moment that as we are preparing all of this, we are discussing it all with the ministry. But when we pull together our first thoughts about the way forward, it will have, as part of it, implications for the ministry, so that these things are quite explicit and need to be addressed. In an ideal world, and I'm conscious none of us live in an ideal world, but in an ideal world, there would be regular meetings between ourselves, these key groups, ourselves, the ministry, rectors, and the students, talking about policy issues in higher education. Now, ours with a relatively minor role because we are outsiders, but we have something to offer in terms of what our systems are telling us. And I've discussed that with the officials at the ministry, and you get nods, but nothing actually moves forward. But I'm not attaching any personal blames for this. I think it is a feature of life just now.
I'm just asking this question because we are here all doing this to enhance the education, the quality of the education. And of course, the resource we reach is that it's going to call for resources. It's
Absolutely.
So we need a very formal way of communicating all this research from all these quality enhancement to the ministry.
Yes, yes.
It's extremely important.
Yes. Well, you can certainly be assured that we do and will continue to give that message, because it is terribly important. And most recently, in my personal case, in the University of Iceland, although it is doing incredibly well in all the contexts in which I've been talking, it is stretched, and folk will openly say, and I think colleagues at UNAC agree, that it is stretched to a point where things can break. And what breaks is the well-being of students. And that's not where any of us want to be. And we need to just keep giving that message. So we will, I assure you, we will be relentless in continuing to push. I am now standing between you and coffee. Yes.
That's a perfect place to be. Because I'll get everybody's attention. My name is Ejo Guðmundsson, rector of the University of Akureyri. The question that Kristen mentioned is really, really important, but I think it's too limited. We currently have a situation in Parliament in the way that they are voting for a new financial system of the government budget. It doesn't matter what discussion we have with the Minister of Education. Parliament decides to spend only roughly 5% of the annual budget into higher education. So it's really Parliament that will, under this new law, Parliament will decide what the chunk of the total budget will go to higher education. So it's really not only a question of discussion with the ministry, but with Parliament and therefore society. So, because we are all here not participating in the process, but I don't see the general public. And the general public is paying for the higher education system in Iceland, one way or the other. So I kind of want to add that in the discussion. It is about communication with the society as well.
That is a point really well made. And I don't know what levers you have to pull in that regard. What are the main mechanisms here for lobbying Parliament, and who's in the best position to be doing that? And again, I suspect it's a number of different groups. Students again have a role to play in this, as much as any other group, and of course the rectors. Welcome to your rector, Jean-Marc. Let's dwell on that and reflect on it as we have coffee. Shall we, Thorsten?
Thank you, Norman. So we now break for coffee, and we will have 20 minutes coffee break. So please be here 3:45. Thank you for the discussion.